Patterned embossing is a great way to breathe new life into all of your chunky solid stamps. Let me show you the tools and products you're going to need to do patterned embossing. First, you're going to need a chunky stamp. You're also going to need some Versamark ink, an anti-static pad, and some clear embossing powder. Then you're going to need some sort of background stamp, and in this case I'm using one of the stamps from the Vintage Borders set by Nina Brackett for Gina K Designs. You're also going to need some lighter colored ink, and I'm using the Vivid Taupe ink. It's the perfect ink for my project. It's not too dark, but it's still visible. You're also going to need a darker ink that's like a complementary shade to that lighter ink. So I'm using the Vivid Coffee Bean, and a sponge or a sponge dauber. You're also going to need a paper towel and then some cardstock, and I'm using the Gina K Designs Pure Luxury Ivory cardstock. So let me show you how we're going to begin patterned embossing. First, we're going to create our pattern on our piece of cardstock, and let me just grab a piece of scratch paper to work on here. So like I said, I'm using this strip of music notes from the Vintage Border set. And some of you have some bigger background stamps at home that you want to use. But this is such a nice background for holiday cards. And I'm just going to stamp 3 impressions of this stamp, just right under each other. And one more. Okay. Now my next step is to emboss on top of this pattern. So I'm going to use the anti-static pad to remove any static from my cardstock, and it also will kind of blot up any oils from my fingers. And then I'm going to stamp it using Versamark. And the image I'm using is the bird image from the Holiday Cheer stamp set that's part of the Holiday Cheer Stamp TV kit. I'm going to make sure I get a nice solid impression. Now I know that you can't see that on the camera, but you'll be able to see exactly what happens as we continue the process. Now using some clear embossing powder, I'm going to emboss the bird. Just get rid of any excess embossing powder. And let me put that back in my jar to get it out of the way. Okay. Now, I've embossed the bird image and I've used the clear embossing powder, and now I'm going to hit it with a heat tool. And I'll be able to see it better in person, in real life, because it'll get all shiny. Although that may not pick up on the camera. I'll try to angle it just a little bit so maybe you can see that little bit of shine reflecting off of there. There you go. Okay. So now that I've embossed my image over my patterned background, the next step would be to cut this out to the shape that I desire, whether I use a paper cutter, a paper punch, or in my case I'm going to use one of the Nestability's Petite Ovals. So I've already done that for you, so that you don't have to watch me do that again. And there is a Stamp TV video on how to cut using Nestability, so if you're not sure how to do this, you can watch that video. Okay, and the next step then is I'm going to leave that in the frame, and I'm going to grab my sponge dauber and my coffee bean ink and ink up my sponge dauber, and then I'm going to sponge over the entire surface of this patterned background and my embossed bird. Now some people like to do this with a brayer, and that's fine. You certainly can do that with a brayer. It also looks very pretty when you use those Kaleidacolor ink pads that are multicolored. It's a great look too. You can try it all different ways. And you can start to see the image of the bird is peeking through. sure we have enough ink covering the entire thing. Okay. And the last step before removing it from the die is to take that piece of paper towel and you're going to rub it all over the surface of the bird to remove any excess ink that was sticking to the embossing powder. And I also like to remove it from the surface of the die too, so I don't get any on my edges when I pop it out of the die. And what's left behind is a beautiful bird. And then throughout that chunky image, you can see all the little music notes going through. And then it also, because I use the nestabilities, it leaves a nice white border around the outside. Let me show you my finished project. Here in my finished project, you can see I did utilize that little edge as a nice layer, and then I've also layered it with some of our cranberry tart cardstock, and then another layer of the ivory. It makes such a classy holiday card. Try patterned embossing with some of your larger background stamps or even on patterned paper for another great look.